Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Katie and I are really excited to talk with you about location strategy. So today we are going to focus on location strategy drivers. So talking about why having a location strategy is so important. Katie's going to provide an overview of UNC and talk about the impetus behind their pursuit of a location strategy. We'll talk about what goes into creating a location strategy, and then we'll share the top 5 learnings and results, as well as some key takeaways. And as Cole mentioned, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So let's go ahead and dive in to our location strategy drivers. So I want to start out by taking a look at some key local search statistics. So the first one, reported by Google, is that nearly 1/3 of all mobile searches are related to location. Google also reported that 82% of smartphone users say they use search to find a local business. 63% of local searches are made by people who are undecided on either a provider or a retailer, according to the Local Search Association. And Google also, in 2017, found a 200% plus growth in mobile searches for the terms open, now, and near me. And Bright Local reported that 58% of consumers used voice search in the past year to find local business information. So you've no doubt heard one or two of these statistics before, but it's really powerful when you take them all in together. What they clearly show is that the desire by consumers to easily and quickly find local information continues to grow. But what exactly does this mean for us as healthcare marketers? What it means is that we really have a huge opportunity, and one that we're not seeing health systems and hospitals take full advantage of on a regular basis. The statistics I shared really point to the opportunity for healthcare systems and hospitals to capture consumers in what Google calls micro moments. And for those of you who haven't heard of micro moments before, micro moments are those moments when a consumer turns to his or her device to either know something, go somewhere, do something, or buy something, and they want to do it immediately. In healthcare, an example of this is often a search like the one on the screen here for urgent care open now near me. Or it might be a search for a primary care doctor by one of those 63% of people who are undecided on a provider. So if you don't show up in a consumer's exact moment of need, those micro moments, you're missing an opportunity to drive business through your doors. And your competitors are usually the direct beneficiary of your absence. So anticipating, understanding, and capitalizing on micro moments is key to local search success. But to do so, it's really important to understand the current search landscape, those things that are affecting your ability to show up in those micro moments. So let's take a look at some of those key trends that are impacting local search and see how they're driving the need for a location strategy. Before I do, though, I do just kind of want to jump ahead to the proverbial last page in our story here and just share that location strategy is more critical than ever before. So we hope the one thing that you'll take away from our webinar today is that if you don't have a location strategy, now is really the time to start thinking about it. Or if you have thought about it in the past, now is the time to really start to act on that and pull together a strategy and start to execute on it. So the first trend that I want to talk about today is voice search. And now you no longer need to be sitting at or have access to a keyboard in order to perform a search. With the rise in the adoption of voice assistants, search is literally everywhere now, from our phones to our cars to voice-enabled devices in our homes and our offices. Google anticipates that half of all searches will be voice searches by the year 2020, and that really is a staggering statistic, especially because 2020 is just a little over a year away. And it's also one that has direct implications on local search strategy. So imagine if a consumer in your market asks Alexa or Google what the nearest family medicine doctors are to them. How exactly are those results being generated? Without going too deep into voice search, it is important to know that the top 5 voice assistants rely on a combination of data sources, including Google, Bing, and even Yelp. So if you haven't claimed your listings on these sites, your chances of being returned in a voice search result are low when consumers are asking questions with the intent of finding local healthcare services. So claiming and keeping your directory listings up to date is critical not just for SERPs, but also for voice search results too. And a location strategy helps you determine what location listings to create or claim and what information to include. So local listings are important to keep in mind when it comes to the voice search trend. And that leads to our second trend, which is location. While the ability to search from just about anywhere from any device continues to grow, the user's proximity, the relevance of content to their search intent, and your organization's prominence all drive local search results. Google's primary objective is to be an answer engine, to return the most valuable information as quickly as possible to the user based on his or her search intent. So for example, location is very critical to returning the best results. So if I'm searching for urgent care in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, here where Geonetric is located, my results will look very different from someone else's search just 1 or 2 towns over. So customizing your content based on location in order to show up in those hyper-local kinds of results is very important to your ability to appear in local search. And historically, as healthcare marketers, I think we've tended to focus much more heavily on services and provider content for good reason, but far less on locations content, with the exception of hospitals. We do tend to focus quite a bit on our hospitals. But the continued evolution in local search really points to the need for us to adapt and focus more heavily on locations than we have before, as well as different location types in order to meet consumers in their micro moments. And building on the importance of developing local content to help Google match user intent to your organization and services, it's also critical to understand that Google is creating a map, or what they call a graph, of entities, which are real-world people, places, and things, and they're collecting actionable information about them. So schema.org, which helps to drive this knowledge, is a code or a language that helps Google better understand entities and the connections between them in the real world. The graphic here on the slide shows the relationships of hospitals, physicians, and specialties that are all part of medical schema that's available to us in the healthcare field. We could go deep into schema.org here, but I'll spare you that. The key takeaway is really that schema is growing in importance, and adding schema code to your website really helps Google understand the breadth and depth of your organization, which in turn increases your ability to show up in consumers' micro moments. And that leads us to the last trend that I want to touch on today, and that's a concept called entity authority. It's important to have a high-level understanding of this and its impact on search. So up until recently, digital marketers have been primarily concerned with a website's domain authority, which I know you're all very familiar with. And that's largely determined by the number of links to your site and the quality of those links. And that has a direct impact on your ranking and search results. But domain authority is not necessarily the driving factor anymore, at least not solely. Now, entity authority is just as important and growing even more important every day. But what exactly is it? So entity authority includes a combination of both offline and online experiences that provide search engines like Google with a more holistic view of a business. Engagement factors are used as signals of authority, and these engagement factors can be things like reviews or actual visits from somebody maybe carrying their Android phone in with them to one of your facilities, credit card transactions, and other similar types of engagement factors. And increasingly, transactions and interactions like these are becoming a much better proxy for the quality of a result in Google's eyes than domain authority or click-throughs. So the power of links, we believe, will fade over time as Google is able to ingest a broader range of engagement signals. So reviews, for example, like the ones that you find on your Google My Business listings, are a significant part of determining entity authority. So developing strategies for ensuring a strong presence in local search and to be present in consumers' micro moments All of these trends or evolutions in local search really boil down to three key elements. The first one is proximity. So this is all about a user's location or the location that they specify in a query. So incorporating location-specific keywords in page titles and H1s, for example, and claiming and managing your business listings are all very important so that you can be found in both text and voice search results. The second is relevance. Meeting a user's search intent becomes possible through understanding what users in your market are searching for when they're looking for local care, and then tailoring your content accordingly. And third is prominence. So how well does Google understand your business and how your services, providers, and facilities are all connected? And that's driving the need for schema.org that we just talked about, and a focus on marrying online and offline experiences together, that entity authority concept, to provide a better understanding of authority than just links alone. So focusing on all three of these elements together is what will ultimately help you achieve success in local search. And a location strategy can really tie all of these things together. And while this framework is helpful, perhaps a simpler way to bring this all together is just to say that we can really no longer look at our websites, our directory listings, or even reviews and our reputation management programs in isolation of one another. They are becoming more interconnected than ever before in this kind of perfect local search storm, we like to call it, that really requires a holistic approach if we're going to be able to succeed in meeting consumers in their micro moments. So now that I've set the stage by sharing key drivers in local search and some of the complexity around that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie to share what was happening at UNC specifically and in their market when they decided to pursue a location strategy. Katie?
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everybody. I want to give a little bit of background about our health system before we jump into the strategy piece. This is our academic health center in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And UNC Healthcare is an award-winning academic health system. The School of Medicine, which is also in Chapel Hill, is a big part of our system. And then throughout our state, we have 9 hospitals or hospital systems. We have some small systems that are part of our larger system. And those community hospitals vary from a 25-bed hospital in a rural community to a 660-bed tertiary care facility in our capital, which is Raleigh. We have about 30,000 employees across the system, more than 3,000 providers, and about 3.5 million clinic visits each year. Our mission is to improve the health of all of the people of North Carolina. We do have some strong research programs to support the clinical mission. We also have learners of all kinds across our system, medical and nursing students with a PA program, variety of allied health students, and we are teaching the next generation of health professionals and hopefully keeping a lot of them in North Carolina. Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham, those are 3 big cities in our part of the state that we refer to as the Research Triangle Park, or just the Triangle. So if you hear me say that, that's what I'm referring to. And this is a growing part of the state, and we're fortunate to be in this area. In the Triangle, we've seen a lot of growth over the last 10 years, with the majority of the new growth in Wake County, which includes our capital, Raleigh, and some of the booming suburban towns that surround it. And to give you a comparison, Wake County is second only to Travis County in Texas for growth, and that's where Austin, Texas is. So if you've read about Austin, think about the same thing happening here in the Triangle. We've got tech companies, universities, a lot of healthcare. So it's a similar kind of place. And Wake County is also a highly educated and relatively wealthy part of the state. More than 50% of people here have bachelor's degrees. The median household income is $76,000 per year, and about 9% of the population live below the poverty line. So I like to give that background to help you understand where the market we're in, where we're coming from, and how that might relate to your system. And what this really means for us is we've got 62 new residents every day. So we have a lot of new people coming into the community. 40 of those 63 or 62 people are moving to Wake County from another part of the state or the world, and the rest are babies that we hope to deliver in one of our hospitals. So our marketing initiative whether that's community relations, traditional marketing, government relations, digital marketing. It needs to reflect this reality of a booming population. So all that background comes into play with our strategy. And so these are some of the location strategy drivers that I want to discuss in a little bit of detail. So we've got new customers coming in. They're looking for doctors, urgent care locations, emergency departments. They're looking for places to go to get care. We want them to choose UNC Healthcare. They may not be familiar with our brand since they're coming from out of state. And so we need to make sure they can find us no matter how they're searching for us. So that was really getting us towards pulling together a true location strategy. So these three key areas: online data. So we studied our existing sites. We did this with Geometric. We built our new websites in 2015, and we spent a lot of time organizing and writing our services content for our various hospital sites. We launched the sites and we watched the data. We could see that the user journey wasn't exactly what we imagined coming into the project. And what we learned was that our users were very location oriented. So our site search data showed a lot of zip code searches with town names. We had a lot of clicks on our hospitals and location section. And during this time, we also continued to acquire new hospitals and new practices. And so that affected our brand and marketing strategy. We opened several new facilities in the Triangle. We have more to come, but this included a hospital campus in Hillsborough, which is a town outside of Chapel Hill in Durham, and a large medical office building in Holly Springs. And our marketing team deployed this High Neighbor marketing campaign in those respective communities. So our offline marketing was already location focused and emphasizing convenience, being part of the community. So we were looking for ways to complement that in the digital space. And then internal needs. I don't know how many of you work in these large hospital systems or especially academic medical centers, but we have internally a collaborative culture, a consensus culture. So we spend a lot of time listening to our stakeholders and incorporating ideas from our stakeholders, taking that into consideration, coming back, presenting updates on our plan. So that was an important factor in looking at not just coming up with a strategy that makes sense, but also one that we could take to stakeholders and that they would get behind. So we need to consider our organization if we want to be successful in changing anything. So one of our first steps was a separate project, which was our UNC Physicians Network website. We redid this in 2016, and the Physicians Network is what it sounds like. It's a bunch of physician practices coming together. They're part of the UNC healthcare system. And so we wanted to harness the power of the UNC brand, but we didn't want to demolish the established local brands because this network is growing all the time, continues to grow. As we partner with local hospitals, a lot of times those practices that were associated with that hospital become part of this network. So we wanted to come up with a site design that allowed us to have just one website, but web pages that really highlighted the practice brand, that had representation of the UNC brand, but didn't smother what was already known and respected locally. And so through this process, we started calling this the micro brand strategy. And academic health centers just generally have lots and lots of brands. So if you work one of those places, you'll know there are centers and departments and all sorts of brands. So this physicians network was like that, and that we had a lot of unique brands, but we wanted to pull it together in a way that made it a little bit easier for the consumers. And so to do that, we worked with Geometric to pull together this design. And I will tell you, this isn't an official technical location, it's a CMS page. But we were able to pull together all the elements that we needed onto those practice pages. And then we studied this site to see how consumers responded and used this site once we had it out there. And Geometric helped us do a study of exactly how this site was working along with some of our other sites. And I'm going to hand it back to Jamie to let her talk about that.
Great, thanks, Katie. So what we'd like to do now, just as Katie mentioned, is talk a little bit about the anatomy of creating a location strategy. So as Katie had said, building on their micro brand approach for the UNC Physician Network site, we really wanted to dig in and understand at a much deeper level how to approach an overall location strategy for UNC, especially given the trend toward more locations visits that we had uncovered, as well as the trends that we talked about earlier today. So to do this, we took a methodical approach, taking all of the steps that are outlined here on the screen. And we'll talk a little bit about each one of these, starting with the user experience audit first. So in order to identify and better understand the user journey and the intent of visitors to all of UNC's sites, we performed user experience audits. And this included using a combination of tools like Google Analytics, heat mapping, and scroll tracking to really understand how users were finding UNC sites, what pages they were viewing, and what pages they were landing on, how visitors were traveling through the different sites, how they were interacting with them, and then how users interacted specifically with Find a Doctor, which in UNC's case is a separate tool. So ultimately, what we really wanted to understand when users landed on or navigated to a locations page, if they were finding what they needed or not. So essentially, were we facilitating the user experience or harming the user experience? So we started with a UNC Physician Network audit, but we eventually did look at all of the UNC sites and did do separate user experience audits for UNC specialty clinics, as well as lab and imaging locations as well. Those were two important location types for UNC at the time. So our user experience audit included an analysis of all the different data listed here on your screen. So things like understanding the makeup of current traffic, how users were getting to the UNC sites organically, the pathways that they were taking through the sites, particularly between services, locations, and physicians, and engagement data. All of that was really critical to be able to develop what ultimately became the underpinning of our location strategy. So to answer these questions, we used a combination of the tools that are listed here, and each one served a critical role and purpose in data gathering and analysis. So for example, scroll tracking, which is shown on the left, is a visual representation of where users are looking on a page. And heat mapping, which is shown on the right, is a visual representation of where users are clicking. So both of these tools are really helpful to help us understand user engagement. And our audits resulted in some really interesting findings, and I want to share a couple of those with you. The first one being around location-related terms. So we did find that organic traffic was the highest driver of traffic to all UNC sites at 55%. And this is not uncommon for healthcare sites, so we were not surprised to see a large amount of organic traffic. It also points back to the trends that we discussed at the beginning of the webinar and how critical organic traffic is to your site's overall health. So digging into the organic traffic, we examined the top 100 search queries users searched for on Google before landing on each of the UNC sites. And then we grouped queries into categories such as location, services, patient and visitor information, and others in order to help us better identify patterns in users' search behavior. And interestingly, most users were searching for location-related terms before landing on a UNC site. And searches for healthcare services without a location keyword, as well as patient and visitor information, drove the least amount of traffic. So it was really interesting to see location-related terms among the top page queries. The second finding is that location pages were among the top sections users navigated to across all of UNC sites. And this particular graphic shows data from the UNC Rex healthcare site, but overall location sections were always among the top sections that users visited. So this confirmed that locations were indeed more important, as Katie mentioned, than we originally anticipated when we first launched the UNC sites in 2015. Our third finding was a bit of a surprise. We found that few visitors actually traveled between services and locations pages. Most users typically stayed within one section or the other. And the graphic here on the screen shows page pathing or user flow for the UNC Rex Healthcare Hospitals and Locations section. So user pathing can be really helpful to understanding the user experience from a particular page or section of your site. And this page pathing is available within Google Analytics. So the starting point is shown on the far left, which is hospitals and locations. And then in the middle, we show the next most common page paths. And then the exit pages are shown on the right. So what this is really showing is that when users started on the hospitals and locations section, they really never navigated to services. And when we looked at page pathing from services, we found that they were not navigating to hospitals and locations. So really interesting finding. The fourth finding is that visitors wanted information on doctors, which is not surprising, but most often they wanted this information when they visited the UNC Physician Network site. On the other UNC sites, users would often click off to find a doctor, which again for UNC is a separate tool. Then they would click back to the UNC site they started at, oftentimes visiting both multiple times in a single session. And the graphic on the screen here of the mobile user journey shows this back and forth activity. Overall, traffic to find a doctor was lower than expected across all UNC sites, but it did vary. And most users clicked to find a doctor either from the homepage of the site or a services page. UNC Physician Network, again, that site was the only exception, not surprisingly, because it was focused on physician information. And I had mentioned earlier that we did separate audits for specialty clinics and lab and imaging locations. So this particular finding is around specialty clinics. And we found that after users landed on a specialty clinic homepage, most navigated to a physician page. Other top goals included making an appointment, viewing contact information, or even getting driving directions. And visits to a physician page from a specialty clinic location often far surpass visits to other areas of the site. Most visitors also arrived at specialty clinic pages from organic search. And our sixth finding was from our lab and imaging audit. And we can see the difference here in user goals between the lab and imaging pages and the specialty clinic page goals that we just talked about on the previous slide. We found that people visited the lab and imaging locations both before and after they received care. So before care, they were looking for information to prep for their appointment, or they were looking for things like registration forms that they could download and fill out to bring with them. After their visit, they were looking for things like paying their bill or viewing their test results. So ultimately, audit results really underscored the differences in user goals by location type. So after all of our user experience audits were complete, there were several additional steps that we took to help inform our overall location strategy for UNC. And this started with stakeholder input. Stakeholder input is really critical to getting a deeper understanding of your locations and the services and details about each one. And it's also critical to capture stakeholder input consistently. So we developed a set of standard questions that the UNC team could use to inform their content development and help them understand unique services that were offered at a location as opposed to services that were broader and more applicable to the service line as a whole and might live in the care and treatment section instead of a specific location. And gathering stakeholder input can be done in a variety of different ways. You can do it by phone, you can set up online surveys, or you can even meet in person, or a combination of all of these depending on the different groups that you're talking to. Next, we built out what we refer to as location personas. So our audits showed that different types of locations needed different types of content and information. And the top user goals were different, as we just looked at, which required different content structure and required different content and the content to be structured differently. So after personas were fleshed out, our team also made some SEO and content strategy recommendations for each of our location personas, focusing on specialty clinics and lab and imaging locations first, since those were the two most important locations for UNC at the time. So the team made recommendations such as navigation and keyword usage and placement in page titles and H1s, and even things like alt text. We created a formula for the creation of page titles and meta descriptions so that they were consistent across the location pages. We also made recommendations for how to cross-link content, as well as adding schema.org code, using canonicals and friendly URLs, and then how to align location listings with business listings. We also created some criteria for when to create a locations page in the first place, and Katie is going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute or two. And lastly, we used all of the information and learnings from all of the previous steps to design a locations template that would be flexible enough to accommodate the different location personas. So essentially a template that would allow the UNC team to only have Geonetric build the template once, but allow them to extend it across multiple location types across the UNC system. So all of that said, the key takeaway from our anatomy discussion is really that all of these steps are important and sequential, and design should always come last. So you want your data to inform your strategy, and the strategy then should inform your design. So resist the temptation to design first. Otherwise, you are assuming that you know what your users need. So ultimately, if you're assuming, you may end up with a locations design that doesn't quite meet the needs of your market. So now that I've outlined all of the steps that we took to inform and develop our location strategy, Katie is going to share some of our top learnings from all of her team's hard work. So I'll turn it back over to you, Katie.
All right, so we're going to talk about our top 5 learnings, and we're going to count them down. So get ready for this. So number 5, create location pages strategically. Sometimes you'll need a location page, sometimes you won't. So it's important to establish some criteria around that. And this also helps to set expectations with your stakeholders. At UNC, we had a head start based on how our Find a Doctor database was set up. And so that was really our source of truth for information about physicians and locations. And so if patients needed to make an appointment somewhere or go somewhere, we already had information about that in our Find a Doctor database. And those key location pieces include physical address, phone number, which doctors are practicing at that location or which providers. And so all of that feeds in from our Find a Doc platform. And that way, local practice managers can make changes on the fly as needed, and it'll be reflected accurately both on the Find a Doctor platform and on our hospital or practice website. So a lot of those practice or location pages have information fed in from there, but there are also a handful of locations that we create manually when we need to do so. So just to give you a couple examples, we have several suburban campuses that encompass many practices. So on the website, we created separate location profiles to represent that campus. And that pulls together those services all together in one place and links to individual location pages for those practices. And then we also work with our Find a Doc vendor, Doctor.com, to syndicate information across third-party review sites and Google My Business so that we have accurate information, hopefully, wherever patients are looking for it. So that's an efficiency that we try to take advantage of there. Okay, number 4, optimize for SEO. So this is maybe somewhat obvious that we need to do this. And this includes really a focus on your content, to making sure your content on the location page to make sure that it's specific to local search. So using high value keywords and local terms, optimizing page titles and meta descriptions, improving internal cross-linking, creating matching business directory listings, which I mentioned earlier, and then adding schema.org, and that's what you see on the screen here. Geonetric did this part for us. And I think since we've launched this new location template, you can really see that Schema does a lot of the heavy lifting. It's all behind the scenes, it's how you build the page, but these other items related to more traditional SEO still make a difference. And I think it's a little bit of planning that has to go into what content you want to represent on the location, and then link to the more detailed content that's on your care and treatment pages or your services section. just to give you an example of that, our UNC Medical Center dermatology practice has 4 locations in 4 different towns. And so for each of those, we have a custom content section that includes, the common conditions, treatments, the patient-specific information, how to make an appointment, what to bring to your appointment, and then location-specific directions. And we try to describe that with location-specific text to make sure we're emphasizing that on that particular page. And I do want to add, we have hundreds of locations, and this is a work in progress. We've kind of prioritized what we did first based on our service line priorities, but we still have a lot of work to do. Okay, learning number 3, different location types require different content. And this gets back into location personas, which Jamie mentioned earlier. So the content for these pages is, you may be able to get a little bit of a formula going for similar services, but you're going to need different types of content when you're talking about some, diagnostic testing or, radiology location, which is going to be different from an urgent care, which may be different from a cancer center. So thinking through the user's kind of orientation when they're coming to those pages, and then of course making sure that no matter what content you're talking about, it's scan friendly, so it's easy to see, using bullets, short paragraphs of text and subheads, using good CTAs, and making sure that all of that content is both relevant, accurate, up to date, which means coordinating with your stakeholders pretty relevantly, and then also making sure your online and offline content works well together. And as I mentioned, for our purposes at UNC, we did prioritize kind of those key competitive service lines first, but we're still working our way through to these other types of content personas. Okay, number 2, locations template design needs to facilitate the user experience. So I think this is maybe where we get into the most back and forth with our stakeholders, is really trying to be the advocate for the user and make sure that things make sense. So we want to always incorporate a location photo. Again, online, offline experience, pull it together. Make sure the physical address is prominent, embedding a map, have a clear CTA, highlight the providers that are at each location, include driving directions, and just make sure that you're giving them the information they need to take this action. A lot of times when they're on location pages, it's because they're ready to make an appointment, to walk into an urgent care. So let's make it as easy as possible to do what they can do, whether that's driving somewhere, calling a phone number, making an appointment online, downloading a form, those kinds of things. Okay, and number 1, use location pages as microsites. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier with the UNCPN example, but this is something I hope we could roll out across our system if we ever come to the point where we have one system website. Right now, we still have multiple separate websites for the different hospitals. And so thinking through how we get there, I think the location template and the microsite approach gives us a good option. It still allows us to emphasize the localness or uniqueness of a clinic or practice, but also gives the user a consistent experience no matter where they enter or view anything about our system. And as we were going through the process of developing the locations template, doing all of that research, analyzing it, designing it, we were sort of concurrently working on a new design for a small set of physicians' practices. And going through that, we realized we really don't need to build these separate websites. We can use the location template to give them a really great representation on the web, link to care and treatment information in one place, and hopefully give the user a really good experience. And so we're going through that process now. We've moved a couple of practices into that locations template, but I think that is a big win for us on the web side, user experience side. And for me, just one last thing about thinking about how we'll do this for a system as a whole. I'm always looking for solutions that are scalable. And so this microsite approach is great for us as a system. Like I said, if we ever decide to go into having a system website.
Okay, great. Thanks, Katie. So now we want to share some results with you. So I feel like we need the proverbial drum roll because this is always an exciting part. But this is really how UNC's location strategy has paid off for them so far. So this data is showing year over year for Rex Cardiac Surgery, which is one of their specialty locations. And we're really focusing on organic traffic here, organic entrances, unique page views, average time on page since implementing the new template. And the reason that we're only focusing on organic traffic here is that your overall site traffic can be affected significantly by advertising and marketing activity, which can result in some artificial increases or decreases in traffic. So organic is really the most solid indicator of success. And also because location strategy is really about meeting consumers in their micro moments, like we talked about at the beginning of the webinar today. So that's why organic traffic is really critical. So we're showing some really nice improvements here for Rex Cardiac Surgery location. And then this is a look at year over year results for all of Rex location pages. So again, some really nice increases in key metrics across the board. And then finally, we wanted to share results in year over year organic traffic to all Rex location pages from various cities in UNC's market. And we were really thrilled to see such large increases in these particular communities because they are part of Wake County, which Katie mentioned at the beginning of our webinar today, is seeing some of the most significant population growth in their area. So really great results and a great example of how implementing a location strategy can really be a positive thing for your organization. So I'll hand it back over to Katie to wrap up with our key takeaways. Katie?
Here we go. It's our last list of the presentation. Key takeaways. 1, location strategy is a process, not a one-time event. Things are changing in the digital space all the time. We all know this, so we need to be ready to adapt. Number 2, don't skip research. Understanding your audience is key and where they are at the journey. So consumers are at different places in their journey. They're almost always going to start by searching. And so what can we learn from that user behavior to give them the best experience online? And number 3, leverage learning so all locations can benefit. And again, this is, I think, useful for those of us working in large systems or systems that are merging with other systems and really just being able to find some efficiency in the reduced duplication.